Hello and welcome to From Our Perspective to Therapist Moms and a Mic. I'm Claudia Glassman.
And I'm Katie Truax.
Hi, Katie.
Hi, Claude. Today we're going to talk about boundaries.
We are. I think I talk about this. I don't know if there's a day that this doesn't come up multiple times for me in session, right? Do you ever not talk about boundaries?
No, I mean, it's such a really rich topic, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it weaves through everything that we could talk about. I mean, and even I have, and we can get to this later if you want to, but I have what I call my boundary primer, which is sometimes where I'll break the mold of like what's traditionally expected in therapy, kind of a more client-centered, free associative, process of talking together, where I will teach people some foundational concepts about boundaries. And I always tell them, okay, this is going to be different. And you're going to love me and you're going to hate me for this because it's going to change how you look at so many things, yourself, your relationships, right? Your resentments. And I'll give them this foundation, and then we use it as like a platform to springboard off of for like so many other topics, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So let's dive in. Where to start? Where do you want to start with this?
Well, let's define it. I mean, what is a boundary in your mind, right? And here's the other thing. If you were to Google this, you'd find a billion websites. You'd have different clinicians defining this different ways. You'd have authors writing about this from different perspectives. When I teach my boundary primer, I say these are Katie-isms, okay? So like, you and I might have similarities, and we're going to have differences probably too in the way we consider this clinical issue. But how would you define a boundary?
Yeah. So we kind of chatted offline about this, but I feel like this term gets, there's a lot of mental health terms I think that get tossed around pretty flippantly and not necessarily accurately. So the way I describe boundaries to my clients is that they are, I don't even want to use the word limitations. They are place markers. Like I'm thinking of like a physical like boundary, like like on a soccer field, like the lines that are painted to stay in bounds is how I imagine it, right? They are things that you designed to stay in relationship with the people you want to be in relationship with, so that you can feel safe and secure and connected to these people. So what someone's boundaries look like with one person in their life, they may not look like with another because there may be different needs. But oftentimes I have clients that feel like boundaries are like a barricade that they set up to protect themselves. And my argument is, well, that's not really what it's meant for. It is meant to stay in relationship. But yes, they are guidelines, I don't know, guardrails, right? Like meant to keep you on track in that relationship.
Yeah, I like that.
So it's not a cutoff. It could create distance, I suppose, if that's the safety thing, but it's meant to allow you to stay in relationship with a person. If you don't have a relationship with a person, you don't need boundaries. You just done. Like build the wall and call it a day, right?
Right.
How do you define it for your clients? Or kind of what's your concept?
Yeah, I think that, again, right, this is hard. I think I might use the term limit to describe what you just described as boundaries.
Yeah.
Which, again, different clinicians talk about different things in different ways, and terms are used interchangeably sometimes. But in my Katieism, I think of boundaries as delineation where one thing stops and another thing starts. And yes, most often I talk about this and teach about this in the context of relationships, but in truth, we can use boundaries around time, right? For this amount of time, I'm going to be doing something. We can use boundaries around things like food consumption. I'm going to allow myself 2 of these cookies, right? We can use boundaries around the money that we're spending, right? So whenever there is a start and a stop, we can think of the edge where that occurs as a boundary. And any boundary is going to create clarity, create structure. And again, we work more with relationships, you and I, than things like time management or food or money management, right? Although sometimes those things get woven in, but to think of where do I start and you stop? Where do you start and I stop? And getting those things clear can be eye-opening for so many people.
Yeah, because you're kind of taking that like codependent route, right?
That is exactly right.
Yeah.
Yes. And so I teach people kind of the foundation of like a healthy relationship. And once we define that in terms of boundaries, then I poison it and I say, but so when it looks other than this, we call that codependency. And that's start to love me or hate me, because it does get really clear. And sometimes it feels really validating for them to hear that and really supportive. And other times it feels like oh shit.
Yeah. So here's what's funny about our podcast, because if we did the same topic 2 weeks from now, we may discuss it differently. And here's why. Because I think we are influenced by the sessions we had 2 hours ago or 30 minutes ago or whatever, right? Or the topics that came up during the week. This is how we come up with our topics. We literally chat for 5 minutes before we go on and we go, hey, what came up for you this week? And here we are. So it's really funny because I realize I'm thinking of it through the conversations I've had in this week, which were not so much as codependency, but maybe a little bit more around having to set limits with people that aren't always kind or are trying to take, I don't want to say control, but being a little bit domineering in someone's life and having to set a limit around what you will allow others to do and not do to you. And then you're approaching it from this codependency thing. Where do I end and you begin, and vice versa? So both are true, right? Just different ways they show up for people. But it's just really funny because I can tell what kind of sessions we've had based on the conversations we have.
Totally.
Yeah. I don't know who your clients were, but I know what they struggled with.
And I think so many people do, right? I mean, or maybe it's just that this has been part of the path that I've walked in this career. I know it was one of the first things I had to learn when I was in therapy. My therapist said, have you ever read Codependent No More by Melody Beattie? And I was like, no. She was like, go ahead and grab it on Amazon.
We'll talk about it next week. Yeah.
Yes. And it was life-changing, right? And blew my mind back then, and has created such a foundation for ease within relationships, that I'm so grateful for. Now, relationships aren't easy, but conceptualizing things gets so much more clear when we can be clear about what is mine and what is yours. And that all of my stuff, right? And I tell people seven dimensions of self, right? And I suggest thoughts, feelings, body, behavior, money, house, and minor child / pet / if we were to take some sort of legal responsibility for like an elderly or disabled relative, right? All those things, those 7 that I just listed, belong 100% to me and to nobody else. And I don't have responsibility for any of anybody else's unless it's my minor child. And then it's only to the extent to which she cannot do for herself, right? And in a relationship, we can give gifts of presence, of time, of help and support. But I also teach ways to know when that's okay and when it's not, right? And that's kind of, I call it chapter 2. But getting that foundation of like, all mine is mine. And
Yeah.
all yours is yours. Even if we're in the most intimate relationship, parent, child, spouse, best friend, co-owners of businesses, and we ride hard together and run life together, it's still the case that all my shit is mine and all your shit is yours.
Mm.
And nothing can change that. We can, again, give gifts or ask for support or ask for help and give the other the opportunity to say yes or no. But wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
That there's a clear definition between where you stop and where I start.
Yes. And I think the struggle people have is that now I can be in a relationship with you and I have my boundaries
Mm-hmm. Right.
and you have yours. And maybe there's a little bit of a mismatch or disagreement around where those lines are.
Yeah.
Because people have, for better or worse, different definitions of where they begin and where they end.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because I hear what you're saying, but just because I don't even want to say should. People just have different definitions of where they begin and where they end. You think
Yeah.
about physical boundaries. You've got the huggers and you've got the people that are like, don't touch me.
Right.
There's no right or wrong. That's just a disposition of how comfortable you are with touch and space.
Yes.
And there's a spectrum of that. So you have got a hugger who is friends with a no, don't touch me person. There's going to be some figuring out where those boundaries lie, right? Some trial and error. And that's a really, silly example to some extent, but every area of our life, we can have differing ideas of our comfort. And I had said, right, boundaries are what allow, for example, my boundaries allow me to feel safe and secure in the relationships with people. So if I'm not a hugger, my boundary may be like, I don't love hugging. Thank you. Right. Yeah. But they may not work for the people. The people I'm around may be like, I don't like that boundary. And that's where I think those conflicts happen that we see, right? Couples therapy, anything, whatever. People come in, parent-child things where it's like, well, I don't like the boundaries someone set.
Yes.
It doesn't feel good to me. I feel like it's too rigid. I feel like it's too that, right?
Right.
But again, when I reframe it for people, and this is part of why I reframe it that way, is this is what is needed for them to feel and be in relationship, feel safe and be in relationship with you. It feels less punitive. They're not doing it to hurt you, punish you, limit you, or invade on your sense of what is right or wrong. They're doing it because this allows them to feel safe. So that is the boundary that is set.
Yeah.
Right? Because that is what it's about. It works for me. It may not work for anyone else, but it isn't meant to harm people either.
That's
Although,
right.
And one of the things we kind of chatted about briefly before starting is sometimes people do it as a punitive action, maybe.
Like a withholding. Well, let's go with that example of hugging, because I actually have had this come up in session. I've had this come up in session from grownups. I've had this come up in session from parents talking about their children and expectations of relatives that they hug. So I think this is it's somewhat of a maybe simplistic topic that could help us explore this in a way that we can all imagine, right? We're all either one or the other. I guess maybe but here, okay, so sidebar. I was trained as a therapist, and not a big part of my early training was as being a therapist to children, and I was trained to not touch. I was trained that hugs are for asking. And if a child were to ask me for a hug, I could choose to give a hug if I thought it would be clinically helpful, or I could choose to not hug if I thought it could be harmful to the child based on their own attachment history, their trauma history, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a lot for a new therapist to try to think about in this moment. I also
while a kid just grabs your leg, by the way.
Right, and they're just like, hold me, I've been so lonely, right? I also had an interesting experience so early on around touch with an adult client where I had to learn the hard way because I was raised by people who went to church religiously, no pun intended. And part of that upbringing was very much indoctrination of you look people in the eye, you smile, you say yes ma'am, you say no ma'am, you say please, you say thank you, and you extend your hand and you shake with a firm handshake every time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then fast forward here, I'm like in my mid-20s and I'm like becoming this therapist and I'm shadowing another therapist and she introduces me to a male client and I extend my hand for a handshake. I didn't think anything of it.
Yeah.
And later she came to me and she goes, listen, I got to teach you something. And I was like, what? And I was mortified because she said, he really didn't handle that well. He spent the entire session completely decompensated because he was sexually aroused by your handshake. And I'm like, oh my God, like worst nightmare for a 26-year-old trying to figure this out for the first time, like in an internship or whatever I was doing, like trying to do the right thing. And here I was doing what I was trained to do, right, to be a good girl. And oh boy, was it the wrong thing. So there are many ways in which I think therapists are taught a different boundary around things like hugging or even handshaking, right? That like we don't touch unless we're really, really sure and intentional and aware of it, right? So
Mm.
we're like a little subset of the population when it comes to stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, because so here, speaking of boundaries,
Right.
we are we are given recommendations, I'm going to say, because I'm sure there's people that do not follow these, right? But we are given recommendations early in our careers to have very rigid boundaries.
Very, very.
Some of them make sense to me, some of them don't.
Right.
And I have curated my own set of boundaries.
Yes.
Like I'm still ethical, but some of them don't make sense to me. You know, there is and this is getting a little sidebar, but you know, there's the philosophy of like never share anything about yourself. I don't subscribe to that. I like that my clients know that I'm human with a human experience.
Yes.
If I feel like something is going to benefit my client or help them therapeutically, I share it. If my client asks me where I went on vacation last week because I was out, I'm not all weird about it. I don't go into great detail, but I'll be like, I went to Florida, you know, I like, but I remember being trained by people like, you never share anything. I don't want to go to a therapist that is weirdly disconnected, you know? So
Yeah.
I am not that therapist, but we are a little strict on it, but
yeah, we're supposed to be the quote unquote blank slate.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I know maybe we are weird with our boundaries.
Well, but let's go back to my Katieism for a minute, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so the sharing piece, right? That belongs to me. I get to choose what I share.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And
Right.
a client gets to choose what they share. That belongs to them.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And a client's body belongs to them and my body belongs to me. So let's imagine that my client, and I do have clients that I hug. It typically has been a relationship that I've had for a long time, and I've thought through different things about the pros and cons of that. Now, again, this is specific to the therapist client relationship that we don't necessarily have to think about, although sometimes we might moving about in the rest of the world. But what does the hug mean, right? And what would it mean if I forgot one day to hug, right? And could that relationship be sustained, or would it be harmed if I'm just in a hurry to go to the potty or something and I forget to give a hug goodbye, right? Or if my client that I don't hug sees me hugging this other client, there's a lot around touch. But my body belongs to me. And if I am a human that doesn't want a particular type of touch, it's my responsibility to set that limit.
Yes.
And similarly for the other, right? If I am naturally a hugger and I go in for the hug, it's the other's responsibility to set the limit. And the concept of responsibility, I think, is really, really powerful here, because without responsibility, if we forget that element, then things get muddy and blame starts happening.
Mm-hmm.
Why didn't she hug me? Well, did you ask for a hug? No. Why did she touch me? Well, did you say no? No. Right? Where is our personal power? How can we fully lean into our personal power in all of our relationships? Now, to your point, there is fallout, man. There is fallout. If we break a social norm,
Mm.
or maybe even moments in our homes, right? These microcosms of the world where, like, there are times when I want to be touched more than other times. There's times when I'll curl up in my husband's arms and say, "Would you hold me?"
Yeah.
Or "Let's snuggle." And there are other times when I'm like, I don't like that touch. That's too much. I'm touched out for the day." Or like, "I'm mad at you and I'm not ready for a hug." Like, you better back off.
Yeah.
Right. But
Right.
it's
Well, so that's a good point. Your boundaries can
yes.
be changing and evolving based on where you are in any given moment.
Right.
So how, when we talk about your clients, but they're violating my boundaries, right? But if it's a moving boundary, if
Yeah.
if it shifts, you can't always be angry that someone didn't know that there was movement.
No. And then, right, the responsibility goes back to that individual to set that limit, to
Yes.
honor their own boundary, to say no, to move away in space, right? And if
Mm,
they don't, it's they own that, right? That's theirs.
yeah.
What they choose to do with their thoughts, feelings, body, behavior, money, house, minor child belongs to them. From my perspective, in my opinion. My
Right.
Katie,
But you can see where it gets confusing, because let's take a marriage
yeah,
where you share said house
yes,
and you share a child and you share
right.
you can take ownership of your boundaries, but what if your partner doesn't have this right? And this is where the conflict happens,
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes that shit overlaps
Yes,
and it is not just yours. And sometimes you and your partner may see eye to eye and sometimes you may not, and then this is the issue, right?
yes,
Yeah.
that's right. Yes, and that is so, so hard. And I've had so many situations where I've like Rolodexed in my mind, right? Because I don't know if all of our listeners know, but when we were building our house, we lived in an RV. It was a really great RV. It was a beautiful place to live. A lot of my friends would come and be like, "Oh my God, I love it. I could totally live here." I'm grateful for that little house. It was just exactly where we needed to be at that time in our lives, but there wasn't any extra space.
Mm,
Everything was open to everything else. And if I needed quiet, right, that's what my body needed, I had to ask for other people to change their bodies, right? So, can you lower your
mm,
voice? Can you give me a gift by taking your body and turning your voice down, right? Or could you give me a gift by taking your body and going into your room so your dad and I can have a conversation,
yeah.
right? Now, parent child, I can kind of be more demanding, right? Because I'm the boss, but like my husband, right? I would have to put that in his hands. Would you please turn the TV down? Would you please, right, fill in the blank? And honestly, I have an amazing family, right? Most times it would say yes, right? Of course. But there are times where the answer is going to be no from the other,
Mhm.
right? If we're asking for somebody to do something because we need it. And then we have to think through, what can I control, right? If you're not going to turn your voice down, or if you're not going to turn the TV down, right? Let's say it's a really important thing. Oh, it's the last 5 minutes of the football game, right? You really want to hear it. It's loud. It's so exciting. Or you're on the phone with somebody and you're so thrilled, or you have company in your house and it's really raucous, right? And this somebody's having a great time. And if I need quiet, I could ask for that. I can ask for the other to change their body, change their behavior, but ultimately it's my responsibility to take care of my body and my behavior. And then I have to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
Right? What can I control? I can't control you. I can ask, but I can't control you. I can't make you do what my body needs in this moment. So what can I do? Let me lace up my tennis shoes and walk around the block. Let me get my keys and take my car to sit in the park.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. And that's where I think people struggle.
Yes.
You know, I mean, even in my house, my kids will bicker about something, like one kid's singing, the other one's annoyed, you know, whatever, little things. And it'll be like, you know, usually the boundary is set unkindly, like, and then the other one decides to bulldoze that boundary and just lean into it a little bit harder, right? Siblings. And the conversations we have is, you asked, it's frustrating that it was ignored. I agree.
Mhm.
You can't control what someone else does with the boundary you set. But I asked them to stop, but they are choosing not to. But that's not right. I mean, we can argue that back and forth, but they are not doing the thing. So now your choice is, how do you, right, stay in relationship with this person while they're pissing you off because they're singing louder than they were before? Right?
I can see this. I can see your two kids.
A lot of power and control dynamics in this one. Yeah. It's
I love it.
like freaking daily. And it's like us, you know, again, they're kids, they're learning, and that's a very, again, simplified interaction, but you see the similar thing in adults,
Yes.
right? It just looks a little bit different, or maybe it's not so in your face that they're violating the boundary, but they still are.
Right.
Right? Because it's a little more subtle. But again, the decision is the same. What do I do with this? I set the limit. The person is not respecting that. How do I want to be? And that's really, honestly, what it comes down to is, yes, there is some level of needing mutual respect. I respect your boundaries and limitations, even though I don't always like it or agree. And I want to be loud, and you're not letting me. Right? And the same is true. And this is why boundaries happen in relationships, because it is about respecting a person's limits and their requests. But they're not always honored.
No.
Yeah.
And I definitely think that it's a two-step dance, right? And in a relationship that's clear, most often if we make a request, we're going to get it as a yes, right? Most often, if I'm in a good place with my husband, right? And I'm overwhelmed at the end of the day, and he's watching the last 5 minutes of the Saints game, and I say, baby, can you turn that down a little bit? My head hurts. Oh yeah, baby, of course. Right? Versus, like, if there's a bunch of shit underlying for us, if we're at each other's throats, and I'm probably like, can you turn that TV down, man? Like, what? Why is it gotta be so loud? Well, fuck yeah, I want to watch the game. Right? And it's the same interaction. I want what I want, and he has the responsibility to say for himself, yes or no, man.
Yeah.
Right? Yes. And it can be easy. And same with friends. Hey, could you call me real quick? Yeah, I can call you, sure. Right? Hey, could, I can't talk today. Let's talk tomorrow. No problem. Let's talk tomorrow. Versus if there's stuff broiling underneath, like, oh, you're withdrawing. Oh, you're overwhelming me. You're not there when I need you. You're not giving me support. Whoa.
Yeah. I mean, and that's interesting. And I have found, and I don't know if this experience is true for you. And I will say this, people that are going to consistently violate my boundaries are not people I'm going to feel safe with.
Yes.
And people I would probably not choose to continue a relationship with. Because again, it comes down to respecting me.
Right.
And if you can't respect that this is how I operate, then maybe we don't fit together.
Yes.
Right? Like, that's what I would say to that. And that gets complicated depending on your relationship. But that's when I think about friendships, for example, that's how I would feel. If you're going to keep bulldozing, and again, boundaries will look different between romantic partners, parent and child, right? Friendships, they look different.
Mhm.
But that's kind of how I feel about it. Like if I am sharing my boundaries with you and you're like, fuck that, and you just keep plowing through them, like, why am I keeping this relationship going? Right.
Right.
And I do think in my work with clients, that's where the potential like family cutoff starts to happen. Right.
Mhm.
Because at first it's I'm going to try to assert my boundaries and set limits so I can stay in relationship with this person. And then it's like they're not playing the game with me. They won't respect
Mhm.
it. They keep whatever. Then sometimes that then evolves to I can't be in relationship with this person because I know I don't feel safe and nothing I do to try to keep myself safe is working.
So let's talk about that, some of those whatevers, right? Where do you hear some of those examples of a family member, right? Because this idea of a family cutoff, it feels like it's such a powerful experience, right? And it's
Mm.
something that seems to be increasing in conceptual awareness and perhaps frequency.
Yeah.
And it's coming up more in sessions, right? And it's bittersweet because as a therapist, I love when people click in with their personal power, right? A minute ago you mentioned power and control, right? That feeling of I'm so grounded in my personal power, right? I'm so clear about that all me is mine. That's such a powerful place to be, and not a power over, because all you is yours and you get to make all your choices and I can make my choices, and we can coexist so peacefully. But then there are the boundary crossers, right? And I can think of some ways these crossings happen where it does feel like an assault, almost like whoa. And then that's where we have to set the limit.
Yes.
And is the limit going to be respected, or is it going to continue to be an assault? And then in that case, who wants to be continuously assaulted? My God.
Right.
Okay, so what are some examples? What are some ways in which you have heard of those limits being continuously crossed from one person to another?
Um
Let's take
well,
Go ahead.
yeah.
I was gonna say, what if we used my 7 things?
Okay.
So the first one is thoughts.
Mhm.
This is a time, boy, isn't it a time when people want to tell you what to think.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I think it's in our oh yeah, okay. So there's a lot of ways they get crossed, right? There's not holding space for difference of opinion, right?
Mhm,
I believe one thing, you believe another, and we can hold space for both things
mhm.
versus me coming in being like, you're wrong, and then just bulldozing the crap out of your ideas and beliefs, right? Um, or even this idea that I have the right to change your mind on something. Like we
Exactly.
can have a conversation and maybe you're like, oh, never thought of that. Noted. But I
Uh-huh.
don't get to control whether or not you change your mind.
Right.
Right. Obviously there's like physical violation of boundaries when it
Oh,
comes to your
your body.
body and domestic violence and things like that, obviously. Um, for some people I've worked with, I did substance abuse, a little stint at a substance abuse center forever ago, right? And that one's interesting because that boundary gets crossed around substances, but not all the time.
Mhm.
So the when the limitation around like consumption of a substance gets crossed, now the partner may have issues with that. I'm fine with you drinking, but not that much, or not
Ah,
that often, or not becoming belligerent, right? And so sometimes people will set up boundaries around like, I will only talk to you before 5 p.m. or whatever, because they're choosing to relate to one version of the person, but
right.
not the intoxicated version.
That's a huge one. I see that so often, right? And that's a tricky one because technically, right, the user's body belongs to them. The drinker's body belongs to them.
Yeah.
The spouse, the parent, the child says, I'm going to choose for my body to not be around your body
Right.
that you've been consuming.
Yes.
And then we come, okay, so we haven't touched on this yet, but this is a whole spin-off that's really, really key, which is deal breakers,
Mm-hmm.
right? I can't control you. You touched on it a little bit, right? You danced around it a moment ago where you said, maybe this isn't a relationship for me if you continuously cross my boundaries, right? I can't control you. I can ask for you. Baby, I don't like it when you have more than 2 drinks. Can you just stop at 2? Right?
Mm.
Or just drink, but don't drink tequila because remember, you go wild on that, right?
Or I don't feel safe in a relationship
Yeah,
when you become a different person or a different version of yourself.
right.
I don't want to be related to that one. I want to be related. But yeah, it is about your own feeling of safety and connectedness in a relationship, right?
Yes.
Again, so it is fair to have deal breakers
Yes.
to say, you know, if I don't want to be with someone who
That's right.
consumes substances. I don't want to be with someone who tells me all my ideas suck. I don't want to be with someone who, intentionally turns up the TV because I asked for this. There are power and control dynamics that happen with boundaries.
Mhm.
I see it in my kids. You get the sibling, and I'm sure everyone sees some of that in their kids. If you have more than one, you get this kind of like sibling, like button pushing shit, right?
Mhm.
But I also know some adults that do that to the people
Oh,
in their lives, and that's a power and control tactic, right? I set a limit, and simply because I asked, they're going to say no. And
mhm.
that's a whole nother dynamic we can get into, right? But you start looking at these dynamics, right?
Yes.
And I think that's when people have to say,
Mm,
is this a dynamic I can work with? Can I feel safe and secure and respected in this relationship with these dynamics?
that's right. Yes. So defining, right? Like a deal breaker would be a sticking point where you cannot tolerate fill in the blank. And you're very clear on that. Is what is healthy for you mentally, emotionally, physically. And you have requested, right, that that be honored in your relationship, and the other will not agree or comply with that request, will not give
Right.
you that gift. And then you, the requester, right, the one with the limit, has to make the tough decision. Is it going to break the deal, right? Is it going
Yes.
to end the relationship?
Right.
Again, business, professional, social, familial, romantic. Is this a deal breaker? I had a couple in my office yesterday, their first session, and he says, listen, couples fight, man. And she goes, well, I don't want yelling. It's a deal breaker for me. And
Mm.
he's like, I'm passionate. And she's like, it's a deal breaker.
Right, because this is the other reality, and we could probably do a whole podcast just on this, but when we come, the way we show up in relationships and our struggles in relationships and these boundaries that we need to be in relationship comes from our own stuff and our own experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why there's a disagreement on what's the right and wrong boundary. I don't like this. You say it's fine, because in your world, it is fine, right? In one person's world, yelling is passion and intensity and communication. And in another person's world, it's highly triggering and it's scary,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we so often forget that everyone we interact with comes with their baggage, their stuff, their triggers. And when they have a limit or a boundary, it's around keeping themselves safe in that relationship because of this stuff, right? This is my history. I know I get kind of weird about this. So this is what I need from the people in my life, right? So let's talk like practicalities, because, all right, I realize I need boundaries and right, but how do I even go about setting those? Because I think if you grew up in a environment where your boundaries weren't respected by your parents, for example, because even little kids have things they like and don't like and prefer and don't prefer.
Yeah.
Some family dynamics support that. Some are like, you're a kid, you get no say. Let's say you never got to practice stating a need, want, desire, boundary, limitation.
Yeah.
How do you even
Oh,
Start that, because I've got clients that are really good at boundary setting and are like, nope. And I got some that are like, I don't know if I feel bad, right? Or,
right.
but it's fine. Like, I'll sacrifice myself for the desires of this other person. Um, so how do you start to, I don't know, advocate for yourself?
Well, I think that it's important to differentiate for a moment that there's two types of boundary setting, right? We can have kind of implied or implicit, and we can have explicit boundary setting. So let me tell you what I mean by that, right? So let's imagine that I'm in the room with my brother-in-law and he's preaching to me about who I should vote for, right? My implicit boundary could be an internal turning off of the dial. Please close
And
now.
yes,
I can
yes,
sing the song lyrics to my favorite Pink song in my head and wait for you to just run out of steam, right?
yes,
Usually that is more subtle. It's more of a peacekeeping approach. It's an inside job,
yes.
okay? It's not always enough. And then when that's not enough, we might have to take it up a notch. Now, the next notch could be I walk away, right? Again, it's my personal power. My body belongs to me. Hey, I gotta go check on the water pressure in the garden hose. You make yourself comfortable. I'm gonna be right out here.
Yeah.
Right. And then sometimes I think maybe perhaps the highest ante is the most explicit, right? Where we say it out loud. Like, I want you to stop talking about that, please. Can
Yes.
we talk
Or I
about
just don't talk politics in
that?
my free time.
Right.
Whatever.
Whatever the
Yeah.
verbalization of is like, this is my limit.
Mhm. Yes.
Right.
And I have
Mhm,
found, and what I tell people is, because I think there's this idea that there's going to be this like, and you will find people that push back on limits. But for the most part, I think there's a fear that I'm going to get some kind of reaction to that. But I
mhm,
have found that most of the time when I set a limit and I'm just very matter of fact, like, it is what it is, most people don't even think twice.
mhm.
For example, if I have too many clients in one day, too many clients, if I have if I see a lot of clients back to back, those are the days I will be least likely to want to see anyone socially after work, because I'm
Yeah,
done. I don't want to talk to people. I don't want to, and I've just said that. Nope, I had X amount of clients. Like, I don't socialize on days where I'm not fun and I don't want to chit chat.
right. I'm exhausted.
And yeah, it's not even I'm tired. It's I just don't want to talk to people. I don't want like I don't want to do this. So it's not that I want to talk to people, because I talk to my family, but I don't want to do the social like group dinner chit chat,
Mhm,
little small talk thing,
mhm, mhm,
right?
mhm.
Or just like, no, and that's not what. No, those it's not a bad day to do it. And I will tell people, do you want to do Wednesday? No, Wednesday's a really busy client day. Can we do another day? No. And I just state that because
Right.
it's true. It's my truth. Or, no, I don't think I'm going to do dinner with that group of people because they stress me out a little bit. You
Well, and
know?
so you're bringing up a good point, right? Which is that is you stating what you're going to do, right?
Yes.
So maybe there's like an intermediate step in there, right? Like that's kind of like that. I'm gonna go check on the garden hose. You stay here and do whatever you want to do. No, you guys go ahead. I'm out for this one because it's a busy day
Yeah.
for me. I'll catch you next
Right.
time, right?
Yes.
But that highest ante, I think, is the one where we take the most risk. And I think that's sometimes where clients struggle because they or not just clients, but people, right? They kind of assume that to set a limit is that highest, the
Mm.
biggest ante, right? The full Monty of saying, I'd like for you to stop, right? Please don't hug me. Please don't pet my dog. Please don't come in my yard. Please don't try to sell that to me. Please don't talk to me about, this candidate, right?
Okay, so I have a couple thoughts on that, because I just had someone knock on my door, like talking politics, and I'm like trying to make dinner, and I'm like, they come at the worst time. I don't know what this like. I I'm like, I don't even want to have this conversation, but I'm nice and don't want to make this poor person feel bad. So I entertained it for a minute, because my husband just looks out the window and shakes his head and like points to he's like, get out. So because I felt I feel bad for people. Like, it took the courage to knock on my door and try to talk to me. So I don't know, I'm a sucker. Boundaries that I don't have, right? So what I did is, so I don't have to deal with this all the time, because I know that once, right, I know that once you get to a certain point, it's harder for me to set that boundary to your face. Maybe that's what I'm saying, right? I feel, and I'm like, it took so much courage to knock on the door. What do you have to say? I'll listen for 5 minutes and go on my way. But this particular time I was really annoyed. Also, because like everyone knows politics are happening and it's a lot.
Yeah.
I just bought a don't solicit sign and taped it right on my door.
Yes, that's a good boundary.
Because I know that once it gets to a certain level, it might be harder for me to assert. So I need to back it up. At what point can I assert that boundary? Because, you know, people tend to start to encroach. It's not, no is like a bulldozer coming through hardcore, right? It's like this step, like, okay, that feels good. That feels okay. Oh, now I'm moving a little closer. I don't love that, but maybe I'll just tolerate this. And then I move a little closer, right? So it's a little bit of a silly example, but I was like, okay, once I look through the glass of my front door, I'm like, ah, shit. I make eye contact. I'm like, you're in. I'm opening the door and I'm talking to you because I feel bad and I don't want to be rude, right? Because we all are a little bit programmed, right? To your point earlier, we have these programs of what is polite and not polite. Shaking my head and pointing to my driveway feels rude to me. So I don't do that. Okay. So once I make eye contact with you, I'm putting my boundary aside and I'm listening to you. Now I might cut you short. I might be like, okay, I got to go, right? I can back out, but I'm in further than I want to be. So I was like, okay, to not even look you in the eye, how do I set that limit? And so I got a do not solicit sign.
Right.
Because that was my way of setting the limit a little sooner, so I don't like have to deal with the hardcore stuff. So the same is true for clients. At what point can you maybe less explicitly, although my sign is pretty clear, but at what point can you maybe assert the boundary with more ease before you get in too deep and it feels harder to do? Right? So when your husband comes home and you say, I'm so tired, I need to go to bed early tonight, and like, God, I don't even want anyone to touch me today, versus he's trying something and you're like, no,
don't touch me.
Because you could have set that boundary earlier. And, you know, I mean, these are a little bit of flippant examples, I think, but to get people kind of the idea of sometimes your timing of when you lay it out there matters. Because I do think we get to a point where we feel maybe more vulnerable or more rude, or like we're not being, I don't know, kind. And we get programmed to be polite and, you know, tolerant. And sometimes that doesn't work well for us.
Yes, and that raises a good point, because the longer we let something go before we set that limit, and again, it can be a gentle, like a tuning out, a changing the subject, nonverbal body language that I'm not engaging in this with you. It can be a not responding to questions, right, or selective responding. It can be moving your body through space in a different direction.
Yeah.
Choices, right? If we set boundaries proactively, to your point, it feels usually much gentler to the recipient, versus if we're engaging in a relationship and we think everything's fine, and all of a sudden you say to me, you know what, Katie, when you ask me about how my dog's doing, it really feels like a boundary violation. Whoa.
You've been doing it like right, and you've been doing it all the time.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
And then that can feel like a slap on the hand, right? And I don't think anybody likes that. And I think that then the other wants to retreat, right? Because that's hurtful. And so that's tricky, right? It's tricky because sometimes it takes a minute. Like it took a minute for your solicitor at the door, right? Sometimes it takes a minute when somebody's, you know, the conversation evolves naturally and you find yourself in a really uncomfortable situation.
Yeah.
Right. And this can take grace and practice, right? And even when I like have been practicing this and teaching people this for decades now, like it's not easy. It's not easy. The implicit boundary setting is easier, if it's sufficient. But I feel like that explicit boundary setting. Now, granted, I've already told you and all my listeners, like I was raised as a Southern belle. And so that programming, even though my rational logical mind knows it's okay for me to have personal power, right? Like that people pleasing is firmly entrenched. And like, I don't want to make other people feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
To say no. So practicing this and finding different nuances and different wording, that is gentle but honors your limit.
Yes. And it is a practice, and it's not a goal to achieve. And you're going to have moments where you feel more empowered and are doing a better job at setting your boundaries. And you're going to have times when you just aren't as great at it, and to be kind to yourself, when you have, those more challenging moments where maybe you're, letting people kind of bulldoze you more than you should.
Yes.
Yeah. And, I mean, this is the other thing. This is how you were raised and how boundaries were approached and what messages you got about body autonomy or your own power to have personal thoughts, beliefs, and opinions growing up. Like, if you did not get an opportunity to practice that, or when you did practice that, you got, hit or beat or spanked or yelled at or whatever. Well, guess what happens as you grow up? Like, it does not feel comfortable. It feels scary to set that. And so it takes practice and repetition to learn that and feel comfortable with that. And that's what I tell people too, is like, it takes time, and it's okay to struggle with it sometimes. You had brought up the example of like hugs and touch.
Yeah.
My kids also, possibly because of when they were born and the times we're in, we never made them hug people they didn't want to hug. It led to a lot of discomfort for the older generations who were like, what do you mean I want to hug and your kid will hug me? And then we get these guilt tripping comments because, again, boundary violation, right? Set the boundary. I don't want to touch you. And then the response is, but I'm and I missed you, or whatever, or I've never see you, whatever guilt trip comment was in place. For my kids, I did a lot of setting the boundary for them.
Right.
And I said, well, we allow them to choose. And if they don't want to hug, that's okay. Maybe they can wave or do something else that they're comfortable with, right? And we gave an alternative for the kids to do if they wanted. We had conversations with our kids about that, but it was really more the other people that struggled. And it led to a lot of awkward moments. I'm not going to lie. A lot of, people probably thinking, what kind of like new age parenting shit is this? Or I had to hug people and I was fine. We chose body autonomy. It did come back to bite me, because my kids will go to the doctor and they'll want to like take blood work, for example. My kids are like, my body, my choice. I'm like, oh crap. Except for when like, we need to make sure you're healthy and okay, and like we need these test results, and like I get it. So but I mean, I guess it still is their body and their choice, right? But it has led to its own set of challenges, because they do assert their boundaries, having learned that they have them and are allowed to have them. So again, it can be a challenge. But I think about, I was parented during a different time and people didn't think this way.
Right. People didn't think of it at all.
No. And
thought.
Right. So I do, right? In the moment with the solicitor, stupid example, but it's like, be polite, don't be rude. Oh, you made eye contact. Oh, the poor person's staring at you. I should open the door and listen to all the crap they have to say because I'm being polite. And my ears were off. I have no idea what she was talking about, because I didn't want to be there, but I acted the right way. Right. But so, I mean, I do this for work and still get caught up in those moments.
Right. That's right. And it's not a huge thing unless it feels like it's harmed you, right? Because we have those moments, the cashier at the grocery store that wants to tell you your life story, and you're like, right? Or ask you, why are you buying all these flowers? What you got going on tonight? You got gas and family? What's happening? I don't really want to talk to you about that, but I'll smile and nod and be cute with you.
Yes.
And then, we have those moments that are, it's like the social lubrication, right? And I don't think our society should strip all of that away, right?
Yeah. Because again, that is a one-time interaction. This lady's not going to come back, hopefully, is not going to come back to my door daily trying to talk to me about this, right? It's a one and done. There was a point to her visit, and right. But if we let that slide continuously in our ongoing relationships, right, you do lead to those moments of confusion where it's like, well, I thought this was okay. You liked this.
Right.
It's like, no, I never liked that. Oh, well, you never communicated you didn't like that. And I thought I was being delightful,
Right.
Yeah. So it is our responsibility to communicate, because it goes into that like mind reading. You should know that this is something I like, don't want, don't want. And let me tell you, people, no one freaking knows.
No, nobody
And it's
knows.
not an indication of how much they love you or whether they know you or don't know you, but they're not in your head. They're not experiencing your thoughts and your feelings. So like, you gotta share it. Yeah.
It's also different. There's no, I mean, you want something different than I want next to Susie and Jane and Mary and Joe. And so we're all, and there's often, I mean, yes, there are hard and fast wrongs, but outside of those, right, set aside things that could be abusive. Beyond that, like, we all just like different stuff from our people, and in a smooth relationship, I think those implicit boundaries are sufficient. And when it's not smooth or those aren't sufficient, we have to set those more firm, more explicit boundaries. The question, I think, becomes, can the other get on board, or is that a deal breaker, right? And sometimes for the other, it's a deal breaker. Like, I feel so shamed. I feel so ridiculed. I feel so chastised. I can't believe you would say that to me. Right?
Right.
I can't be your friend. I can't come around. I can't offer you any help, right? And then we, slide into, okay, is this passive aggressive or is this honest?
Yeah.
Right? And then that can erode a relationship, depending.
Yeah.
Oh, it's deep, man. It's so deep.
It is. It is. Well, I mean, that's why, we have jobs, because it's complicated and it's not so simple. And you've got your stuff, I've got my stuff. We bring it all together. And sometimes that leads to some conflicting opinions and thoughts and feelings. Or, like the example you gave, I feel shamed by your boundary setting. I feel criticized by the boundary you set. This is where it's a two-way street, though. It's not just my ability to set the boundary. It's the partners or the person you're in relationship with's willingness to accept it and hopefully not take it personal, right? Hopefully recognize this is something this person needs.
Right.
And it can be simple. Like, I was sharing this with you because I was at a conference last weekend, and by Saturday I was done talking to people, and my husband comes in the room and I'm sitting on the edge of my bed staring at the TV, just zoning out to some trash I'm watching. And he's like, hi. And I look at him, but I say nothing. I think in my head, I was like, hi, but like nothing came out. Like, that happens to us. And he's like, hello. I'm like, hi. And he's like, you okay? I'm like, I just don't feel like talking. Like, I am so tapped out from this conference and the week that like even saying hi is really hard. Which is not like, normally I say hi to him when he walks in a room. I'm not like, this isn't a normal interaction for us.
Right.
And he's like, are you feeling okay? I'm like, I'm just feeling like depleted. He's like, okay. So he like does this thing in our bedroom, and then he like quietly walks out and leaves me to continue staring at the TV for like the next hour or however long until I like regroup. Right. But in that moment, he could have said, is she mad at me? What's wrong? Why is she not being nice to me? What's happening with her? And he did ask, like, are you okay? Because again, it's not within my normal nature. And then he heard my explanation and was like, that's weird. He doesn't agree with it. He doesn't get it because he wasn't there. But he's like, okay. And so he left me to get quiet to regroup or whatever he was like, whatever he needs to do to be normal again. Right. And then I kind of like turtled for a bit and came back out of it. Right. And that's an example where I'm sure he didn't understand my experience. but he heard my explanation of it and was like, okay, I guess that makes sense from her perspective. Sounds like she wants to be alone, quietly squeaked out. And like, we reconnected later when I was in a less like withdrawn place.
Yeah.
Right. But again, you could see where that could have gone south. Like, why are you being so rude and not saying hi to me? He could have come at me that way.
Right.
Because his boundary that he was setting was, I say hi, I'd like to have reciprocation in this relationship. It doesn't feel good to be rejected and just stared at like, And so he verbalized that like, hi, with another hi, right? And then, are you okay? And then but you can see where that could have gone a totally different direction.
Totally.
Right.
Or let's imagine if he approached needing something from you in that moment. If he needed to vent or needed to cry or needed to, I have a big decision I've got to make tonight. I need to bounce it off of you. And then you're like, I can't.
Yeah.
Right. Because the other side of this coin that, right, we'll tease this, so we should probably wrap up, but the emotional fallout, right? So emotions, feelings are number 2 of my 7 list, right? Thoughts, feelings, body, behavior, money, house, and minor child. Feelings, right? We often don't set limits or can't sustain in a relationship where limits have been set because we can't tolerate our own feelings. And so if I'm feeling like I really wish I could talk to you, but you set a limit with me and you said no right now, that makes me feel sad. That makes me feel lonely. That makes me feel maybe stressed because now I've got to deal with whatever the thing is all on my own. That might make me feel angry at you.
Yeah. And you see that come up a lot during that pattern of disagreements, right? There's an issue in our relationship. I want to talk about it now. I'm mad at you and I want to talk about it now. Right. And the other person's response is, yeah, I want to talk about it. I can't do it right now. Right. I mean, because maybe they're highly triggered. Maybe it won't be productive. Maybe there's something more pressing that needs to be dealt with, right, or focused on. And so you have a person setting the limit of, yes, we'll talk about this, not now. And the other person's like, now. Right. But you see that pattern a lot in partners. He won't talk about this. Well, I will, but just you pick the worst times, or right. Or I need to talk about this now because I'm anxious and upset and want to feel better now and resolve this.
Right.
And you're saying, if I talk about this now, I'm going to blow up and it's going to get ugly.
Right.
That is often a pattern we see. One person retreats knowing that they're getting to their threshold of ability to be productive.
Right.
And another person needs the resolution because the anxiety and discomfort is building so much. Yeah. So it is this ability to feel and be in it without needing that other person to fix it for you.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And sometimes it's a grief of sitting with that disconnection. Like, I really wish it could have been different. Man, I really wish I could have talked to her. Right.
Yeah.
I feel sad. And maybe I cry because I'm sad about that. And that's okay too, because that's my emotions. I get to express those and I get to be in that and I get to feel that. And maybe I take some skills to call a friend instead or write or journal, but maybe I just am sad and I just go to bed and try again tomorrow when he's fresh or she's fresh.
Right. And I think that's where it comes down to that respect piece, right? Like, I respect you enough to acknowledge that you're setting this limit because you need this space, not because you're trying to hurt me or because you don't care about me.
Right.
Right. Understanding that the limits people set are for them because they need that thing at this moment, not because they're trying to deprive you.
Yep.
But we get all in our heads about it. Like,
Yep.
You're just trying to ignore me. It's like, yeah, I just can't right now. Right. And we don't hear that. Yeah.
And to not layer it with the other being the villain or that the relationship is doomed. Right. And like all this negative too. Well, it could just be like, oh, he just can't right now, or she just can't right now. He's tapped out. She's busy. Everything is going to be fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Should we pause here?
We should. It's a big topic. I mean, I think we could do hours and hours on this and come up with again, because that's relationship boundaries, but then you've got time boundaries and financial boundaries. I think those make more sense to people though, because I can say I will only check my email at 8 a.m. right? And like I can time block. Like that makes a little more sense to people, I think. The relationship ones are difficult because you're doing this interaction of boundaries and triggers and people's feelings.
Oh,
All come up.
feelings. I mean, gosh, and the deep feelings, the big feelings come up.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, again, we come in with our stuff. We come in with our attachment wounds, and then we don't always trust that someone is setting a boundary and it's not about us. We're like, ooh, what'd I do? Yeah.
Right.
So
okay.
That's a good one. I like this topic.
And as always, if you guys listen to this and you're like, but what about, or what would you say about this? Or how would you advise me to handle this? We'd love to hear your feedback, your questions. Mostly your questions, not your feedback. Just kidding. No, please feel free to comment. We will, we have a social media output on Instagram. Our websites are, mightyoakparenting.com and claudiaglassman.com. Mine is Rob and Katie Truax, TRUAX.com. Our mail is what, Claudia?
From our perspective at protonmail.com.
And our Instagram?
Oh no! What is it? Oh my gosh, this is
I think
such
it's
bad
from our
form.
perspective. It's from our perspective, two therapist moms and a mic. And where else are we?
That's it. Listen, we're not rocking this. We're not rocking the social media game, people.
No, stop it. Don't complain about your social media manager. She's right here listening. Oh, I know.
That's where you'll find us. Just Google us. You'll find us. Just kidding.
You probably won't.
All right. Till next time.